Hi, so I read Game of Thrones. I hadn't meant to, but I saw this review. It was probably on YouTube somewhere even. It changed my mind and I read it, or rather I listened to it. It was an audiobook, which is a totally different story, and I'll get into that. I know people love this, but for me, if I was to describe this book in one word, it would be meh. I'd give it 2 out of 5 on Goodreads, feeling that I was being quite generous. It was a book of almost monolithic boredom as far as I'm concerned. I was underwhelmed. I was very, very unimpressed on a minute-by-minute basis, and there were a lot of minutes. It was something like 1,036 minutes, this audiobook. Now, before you firebomb my house, I want to make some points about that. I know many people, huge swaths of the entire world, love this book, and I'm not saying they're wrong. I can see why they love this book. And if I had encountered it when I was like, I don't know, 15 to 25, I probably would have loved it too. I probably would have bought all the books. I probably would have read and reread and reread. And I would have tried to memorize the geography. I would have decided which house I wanted to belong to. All that sort of stuff. But 25 is many, many years ago and thousands of books for me. And I am now far more demanding of the authors I read and far more discriminating about the reading matter. And now I notice things that I just wouldn't have noticed back when I was 15. And I don't like many of the things I notice about this book. And let's start with the prose. The prose is ponderous. It is heavy. It is, again, monolithic. It's lacking in any form of sense of humour or lightening of scene. Which I guess brings me to grim dark. Do you know what grim dark is? Well, I only found out this year. It's a type of writing where everything is both grim and dark. So there's bad people doing bad things to each other. It's all horrible. It's all nasty. There's no leavening of humour. There's nothing not light. There's nothing beautiful that doesn't get immediately crushed. And it's all very, very miserable. So basically we're talking about teenage angst. Going back to the fact that I would have liked it when I was a teenager, and as I stayed teenager-like for many years, I still had a lot of angst to work through when I was about 24, maybe even 25. Back then, I would have liked this grim, dark angst, everything is horrible and all human beings are terrible or going to die. Or both. So, yes, that's the prose style. Now, I'm not sure that prose and writing style are actually two different things to people who have studied writing and literature and stuff, but I'm discriminating between them for this book because the prose felt very studied and very intentional. It didn't seem to be something that came natural. It seemed to be a thing that the author George R.R. Martin was trying to do, whereas the writing style felt to me different. It felt very competent but very unexciting. The book was well edited. I feel that it was well written. It felt workmanlike, but it also felt like the writing was basically a tool that the author was using to get the story off the page and into your head. It had no lyrical quality. It had little beauty. No numinous dimension to anything happened in this book. More than 1,000 minutes of it. Nothing like that. The events had no poetry. The stories had no lightness. And again, no humour. A sense of humour is a really beautiful thing. It enhances your story. A small lightness. It can be ironic humour. It can be dark humour. But just give me something that's humour. The only humour that was allowed in this book came from one particular character, the imp. He was allowed 98.5 of all humour or lightning, and no one else had any left. I mean, I guess it's a writing choice that you have. Now, when I say that there was little beauty to this book, it was not totally absent in beauty. In one way, it was beautiful. George R.R. Martin has true talent for describing scenes. So as long as he's describing trees, forests, landscape, cities, alleyways, dungeons, it's quite beautiful. Toward the end of the book, when I was already getting thoroughly bored with it, Caitlin Stark makes it to the Vale, and his descriptions of the Vale are lyrical. They went straight out of the page and into my brain as if I'd seen them. It's beautiful, but he doesn't do that very often. It's mostly about the characters, and the characters are mostly... I'll get to the characters. Okay, so at this point, describing the beauty of his scenes, I am going to say history of reading. Now, I did watch some of the series, not all of it. I think I was already into season 2 or 3. How many seasons did it even have? I'm not sure. By the time I was browbeaten into starting to watch it, and I started to watch it, and I really loved the first season. I really enjoyed it. Got right into it. It seemed totally new. But at some point through watching, I started to get this sense of familiarity that made me think, hang on, maybe I have actually read one of these books. And I think I did. I think I read it sometime before the series came out. It failed to impress me on many levels, and I forgot it quite thoroughly and quite roundly. It impressed me so little that I had no memory of anything except, 1, the wall. The descriptions of the wall are fascinating, and they were enough to make it memorable to me, so that however many years later, when the book was totally absent from my memory, after having watched a number of episodes of this series, I went, hang on, I remember that wall. It's got lashings of the Great Wall of China, lashings of Hadrian's Wall, and if you're Australian, I think it's even got lashings of the rabbit-proof fence in West Australia. The wall as a feature stayed in my memory. Things on the other side of the wall, they were quite memorable. They don't actually appear in this book very much at all. They're just sort of the nebulous evil that we know is there but we don't encounter. And of course it's all very cold. Now I don't much like the cold. I liked it even less years ago. So probably that the coldness of the terrifying things on the other side of the wall sort of stayed enough in my memory to remind myself a little bit that I may have actually read this book. Next, winter is coming. Actually, our winter's just ended. But in the world of Game of Thrones, winter is always coming. And I kind of remembered that phrase again. I don't like the cold. That probably impressed me. More than the winter is coming, I think the idea of a world on the sort of irregular orbit that means that the seasons are unpredictable and irregular, I think that impressed me. But I thought about it for some while before I decided if I knew it from having read this book or read it from science fiction. I'm pretty sure there's a few good science fiction books out there with worlds with irregular orbits. I wasn't sure. But eventually I decided I must have read one of these books, but back then I had a bad habit of picking up a book, whether it was from a second-hand shop or from a library, and not spending too much time worrying if it was part of a series and not the first one. I'd pick up a number 3, a number 2, sometimes a number 7, read it, and I had this fantastical notion that if the author was good enough, it wouldn't matter if it wasn't the first in the series. I was quite wrong, and I've tried to kick the habit, but yeah, anyway. So that's my history of this book. I'm now not so sure. Because the characterization is so woeful, I feel that I may well have read the first book and just not cared for it and remembered it. But yeah. Okay, so read it. Okay, narrated. This was a narration. I got the Audible book by George R.R. Martin. It was narrated by Roy Dotrice, and I thought the narration was absolutely poor. It didn't bother me for the first few 100 minutes that I listened to it, but it slowly got more and more grating and more annoying. Now, the narrator has a very nice masculine voice, and if he'd stuck to his voice, it would have been great. Only he would not do that. He insisted on doing voices, and they are pretty hideous. And they got more and more grating and more annoying. He's got a squeaky, scratchy little voice for girls and children. Makes them sound like hobgoblins. Especially Arya. Arya and her younger brothers in the earlier part of the book, it's like, ooh, wince. But lucky it's not too much dialogue, so that was okay. Everyone else in the kingdom, oh no, not everyone. Males are allowed to have a voice if they are nobles. So you've got Eddard Stark, you've got Robert Baratheon, i.e. the king, you've got Jaime Lannister, Tyrion Lannister, I don't know. They're allowed to have his normal voice or similar enough. Sometimes he puts on a slightly arrogant upper accent, but it's negligible, but whatever. But everyone else in the kingdom, if they are male, and sometimes if they're female, have this poxy, bastardized Scots accent that's very humble, sir. Oh, sure. Well, listening to it, I remember thinking, this is just Uriah Heep from Charles Dickens. Don't do this to me so much. Because literally every character, Uriah Heeping is related to my humble, sir. Now, I didn't know this about Roy Dotrice. I'd never heard of him. But just before I hopped on to the interwebs, and the interwebs tell me that he holds the Guinness World Record for most character voices by an individual in an audiobook, and he holds that record for this audiobook, which I think is a base canard, because in fact he's got, as far as I can tell, 3 voices that he uses repetitively. Okay, now 2 other things about the narration. Early in the book, the word gallant comes up a lot. I have never heard the word gallant pronounced gallant before. Maybe it's a thing somewhere, I hadn't heard it before. Since in the early bit you get a lot of Sansa coming to court, and Sansa's a teenager with romantic notions about chivalry, and there's plenty of knights. You get gallant a lot. I actually thought he was talking about an aunt, and I couldn't figure out how it fit in the narrative. A small thing that was more funny than annoying, but it's just an extra little thing. What else about the narration? Not a lot to say, and in lots of ways it's a pretty good narration. Not always, and too much of it, because did I mention it's over 1,000 minutes? I might have mentioned that, yeah. Okay, so aside from the hobgoblin voices and all the rest of it, on to the characters. So the characters were interesting, because I'd watched the series, quite a bit of the series, going from the televised versions of the characters to the book versions of the characters, ignoring the narration totally, there was certain moments of dissonance. And one specific moment of dissonance was Arya and Jon Snow, because in the book they are described as having very classic Stark looks, which is described as sort of wolf-like. Now, Eddard and Catelyn Stark have a number of children. It's described that most of the children take after Catelyn, which is a Tully characteristics, but Arya and Jon Snow specifically take after Eddard. Of course, in the series, Arya has what I'd describe as pixie-ish features and build, whereas Jon Snow has, I guess, classically handsome, appropriate to fantasy or medieval features. They look nothing like each other and nothing like they're described in the book. So listening to the book and listening to them, there's a bit of dissonance to that, especially since George R.R. Martin leans heavily on families for descriptions both of persons and behaviours. It's like, so we're always hearing about family Stark and what they do and what they think. Family Tully does this. The Lannisters do this. That seems to be a very major way in which he distinguishes between characters and behaviours. So the visuals were a bit dissonant. I also like the characters differently between the series and the book. One in particular that was an interesting variation was Sansa. So I think that the actress who plays Sansa does an absolutely fabulous job. I like almost everything that she does, but especially in the early parts, I think it's series 1, she has a particular whine to her voice and a particular sound that makes it as if she's about to burst into tears. And I found those two sounds that the actress made annoying. In every other way, I liked Sansa, so reading or listening to her character worked well because I could ignore the sounds the narrator was making about her, and I could just concentrate on the Sansa character of the series without the whine. It worked very well for me, and so I liked her even better in the narrated book than I did in the series. Now, on to a couple of other characters. Once again, don't firebomb my house, please. You're entitled to your opinions. Eddard and Catelyn Stark. Oh dear. The movie definitely did them better. Let's start with Eddard. Book Eddard is rigid, humourless, naively dumb. Not just out of his depth in court, but actively dumb. Arya comes to him and tells him stuff that he already knows, but she couldn't know. And he goes, oh, no, you were just listening to some clowns and there aren't any real monsters in the dungeon. I mean, he knows about the dragons, right? You can't have heard anything real. She knows stuff she can't know, and she's warning him that people want to kill him. It's like, oh, pat her on the head and send her off. It's like, okay, right there, Eddard. You are too stupid for words. You deserve to die. I know you're going to. That actually makes me happy quite now. Now, Eddard in the series was portrayed with enough humour and happiness to make him relatable. I did see him smile. I don't think he smiled once in the book. Not once. Eddard in the movie, he loved his family, he loved his home, he was good at ruling Winterfell. Eddard in the book is so cardboard cut out that it obliterated the images of Eddard that I'd got from the series, which was a shame because that Eddard was much better. Moving on to Catelyn Stark. Now, I never loved Catelyn Stark, even in the movie, because if you want to create a character that I am by default not going to like, just make them abuse children for things which are no fault of the child, and you're there. I'm automatically not going to like them. Catelyn Stark was abusive towards Jon Snow because she thinks he's Eddard's bastard son, which is absolutely no fault of Jon Snow, who's treated her with complete courtesy, respect, and great forbearance throughout his life. She's a bitch. Let's be honest. But because it's a movie, you've got an actress, and the actress does a fabulous job, if not of integrating Catelyn Stark into a nice character, at least in making her a slightly believable one with mitigating features. That bit where she gets killed in the series, I didn't mourn her. Rob maybe, her no. But still you had a character that had sympathetic elements. The one in the book has no sympathetic elements, has no skerrick of reality to her, really. It's not just a symptom of a man writing a woman. You get lashings of that. Some men just can't write women. They're not good at it. I mean, I don't think George R. R. Martin writes anyone very well, but he definitely doesn't write women particularly well. Catelyn Stark is worse, though, because not only is it a man writing a woman poorly, it's a very young man who has no concept of what an older woman is and no ability to image or imagine it in any way. I don't think this will bother too many young people. A woman, I guess I'm thinking of Catelyn Stark as being in her late 30s, maybe early 40s. She's older, but she still thinks she might be young enough to bear Eddard another child, and she'd like to try. The actress playing Catelyn Stark in the movie, I think probably late 30s. Imaging that, I don't know. That's how I imagined her anyway. So a 40-year-old woman is not a 20-year-old woman. And I don't think this is going to bother too many younger women necessarily. They may not notice how completely she doesn't work as a character, but for me, she was not real. It wasn't even a cardboard cutout. It wasn't even a stereotype. It was just something completely and utterly not real, and embarrassingly so. So, yeah. There was that. What else? What else can I really say about this book? So, initially, like I said, watching the series, I assumed that I had not read the first one. Now I think I might well have read the first one because the characters are so non-memorable. The only way you can metabolize these characters into anything interesting is if you have watched the series and you sort of photo montage the actor and the series events onto the thing that's being described. Jaime Lannister and what's her name? Cersei. Perfect example. They are bad guys. In the series, they're interesting, vibrant bad guys who you can hate. You can also perhaps sympathize with them a little bit in places. You can certainly emphasize with them, even while you loathe them. But they're real characters. This book, the only way I could remember their names was by associating them with the movie. Will I go on to the next one? I really don't know. When I watched the series, I enjoyed it a lot at first, but I drifted away from it quite dramatically. There were a couple of things that were happening that I really didn't get into that much. I just wasn't digging some of the things that were happening. It was starting to drag and become boring. And then one character appeared, they're not in the book yet, who I really loathed. It's the... After Jon Snow goes over the wall, he meets up with some chick named after a water bird. Stork? Ibis? Egret? Egret? Ibis. Egret or Ibis, one of those. I found the acted character one of the most annoying of all time. Yes, I know she and the guy playing Jon Snow are actually dating or married or something in real life. I don't care. She was still annoying. Oh, my friends say, but she's meant to be annoying. It worked. I was annoyed. I was so annoyed that whenever she came onto the screen, I was inclined to turn it off and go do something else. I'd eventually come back. I'd have Ibis whacking on about how great she is in the background while I did the dishes, and when it moved on to a part of the story that I actually liked, I'd come back and watch it properly. And then one day I went to turn it on, and I just couldn't face any more of Stork, Ibis, Egret, Duck, whatever she was, blathering on, and I thought, I can't really be bothered doing it anymore. So that one killed it for me. I'm very unusual. I'm not basically a watcher, I'm more of a reader. I'm perfectly happy with discontinuing a series in the middle of the moment. I would rather be doing something else. Most people will just sit and watch through, not me. Game of Thrones is a series. I've picked my way through various other events that happened. And it's a great series, what can I say? I've got no desire to watch the whole thing through. With the audiobook, I was creeping up on the same thing. Now, would I have done better with this book if it had have been a real book and not an audiobook? 50-50 chance there. The narration was not great, but it wasn't appalling. It was annoying, but I'm whinging about it, sure, but it wasn't the worst narration I've ever heard. Could have been worse. I don't know if it were better reading, but I really suspect not, because that weight of the monolithic dialogue and the ponderous prose and the lack of humour and the very, very formatted and mass-produced words, I think it would have gotten duller even faster if I wasn't listening to it while I was driving. It would still lack all the humour. I would definitely read it faster than the narration went, but I think I would have been more likely to DNF it than I was with the over 1,000 minutes of Uriah Heep dialogue. Oh my god. At 89% of this audiobook, I sat down and I thought about it, and I realised that I was really over it. I didn't care about most of the characters. It was impossible to care what happens to them. You know it's going to be terrible because the grim dark levels are out of sight. And if you know that everyone is going to die or have horrible things happen to them and you don't care at all, that's just not my idea of a good, fun book. Again, once it would have been, now it's not. Will I go on to another one? I really hope not. Maybe if I've got like 72 hours of driving one day, I'll put that on to torture myself into paying attention to the road. It's Again, a book beloved by many, if most of the world, if you're to believe the stats. Excellent series. Similar to the Dexter series in that you actually end up with a series that is better than the book itself. Even the author of Dexter admitted that. Don't know how George Martin feels about it, but well done to whoever made an interesting movie with vibrant characters, a bit of beauty and humour, and real sense of dynamic interpretation of humans and events. Whoever managed to take that book and turn it into that series, they did a fantabulous job. Anyway, that was Game of Thrones. I am absolutely certain that the next book that I read is going to be more enjoyable. It almost couldn't be less. Thank you for listening to all 27 minutes of this with the bird screaming in the background. Let me know how wrong I am and how Game of Thrones is the best book ever written. By all means, you are entitled to your opinion.